Now it's time for Cleared to Play, where we take you inside the tent and get you updated on the latest injuries in the Bay. Proud to partner with UCSF Health on this segment and bring in Associate Professor of Orthopedic Surgery, Dr. Nirav Pandya. Doc, how you doing? How was Fiji?
I was great country, and I still took the time to text you, Dan. I said, I told my wife and kids, Dan Dibley is texting me, and I gotta get away from the beach. I have to text him back.
I appreciate that. It had to do with a finger injury for a possible. It was an injury, Doc, that I had never heard of in terms of it's the connective tissue in the finger of a possible pitcher that the Giants had their eye on.
Absolutely. No, it's definitely a rare injury, and happy to inform you. It was a good little break on vacation.
Yeah, thank you, Doc. I felt bad when I realized he was on vacation.
No, you didn't. No, your medical issue should not take a man away from his family on a vacation.
I texted blind, not knowing that he was in Fiji, and then he responded and then sent me a picture, and I was like, well, I don't feel bad now. He's living the good life. Doc Pandya live in Fiji. Well, you're home, and so now we get to hit you with questions, and we're going to start where we were just discussing Brock Purdy. The reports are he's started to throw with his QB coach and with an orthopedic surgeon down in Florida. What sort of a ramp up would we be looking at for Brock Purdy? And also, Doc, what sort of a re-injury risk does he have with the nature of this injury?
Yeah, so in terms of the general ramp up, when you look at UCL repair, and obviously most of this is in pitchers, typically most throwing programs have about a 4 to 6 week ramp up, and he's been throwing for more or less a month. So the fact that he's going down there to work with coaches, working with these orthopedic specialists, probably means he's in that final phase where he's throwing more live football-type throws, where he's increasing velocity, increasing the amount, and really can work on his mechanics, as Larry was mentioning a while back. I think that's really the point at where he's at in terms of, okay, we're going to start getting your arm ready for football-type strength and increase the number, work on those mechanics, which is a great sign and shows that there haven't been any setbacks. You wouldn't get to this point unless the arm was ready for that. Now, in terms of re-injury rate, when you look at pitchers, it's about a 90-95% success rate, so very low risk of re-injury. And the fact that football in general has less strain across the arm in terms of the throwing motion as compared to baseball, the risk of this getting re-injured with throwing is pretty small. The thing we don't know is how is that elbow going to hold up to contact. Now, in general, the risk of tearing this ligament by throwing is just one of those freak things that happen to Brock Purdy. So the fact of that happening again, where he's in his throwing motion, his arm hits the helmet, and he tears it's probably pretty low. So I think all things considered, the risk of it getting re-injured is pretty low. The question is, when it gets hit week after week after week, is it going to be sore when he throws? And that's the one thing we don't know until the season starts.
Yeah. Well, if it gets hit week after week after week, Colton McKivitz may be asking for an internship with your medical firm. Now, let me ask you about the quarterback motion, because you made a good point there about it's different than the baseball motion. And Purdy's a son of a pro pitcher. And it's funny, though, you look at different quarterbacks, they have different motions. I remember Dan Marino had a ridiculously awesome release. It was very fast, but man, you could the torque and the whip and the it almost looked like a baseball type release. It wasn't smooth like a Joe Montana release. It was violent and fast. And Purdy throws much more like Joe, where doesn't have quite that snap. Would your prognosis for recovery be different if you have a different type of throwing motion? Because all quarterbacks are a little bit different.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a more violent thrower who throws much higher velocity, kind of releases much farther away from their body. You absolutely are worried a little bit more about that injury risk. Purdy's much more compact and not as violent a thrower, so I think that does improve his chance of preserving that ligament and not having secondary issues in terms of pain and soreness and having to be shut down because things are starting to crop up.
Doc Pandya here from UCSF on 95.7 The Game. Let's turn our attention to the basketball court. Your Golden State Warriors traded Jordan Poole for Chris Paul, CP3. What do you make of his injury history, particularly late in seasons?
Yeah, I think if you look at kind of his history longitudinally, everyone always worries about, well, Chris Paul gets to the playoffs and he breaks down. And I think early in his career, when he was with the Rockets and the Clippers, you had those soft tissue injuries that were bothering him, the hamstrings, the quads, the groins. And those absolutely most likely were due to the fact that he was playing a lot of minutes. He's averaged 34 minutes per game in his career, and he was just simply starting to break down. You look at the last couple of years, and a lot of these injuries have just been freak injuries. It's the traumatic hand injury, his shoulder gets banged up. I think a lot of those injuries that people were concerned about that could be preventable have kind of been aside now for a couple of years. So I think that if the Warriors are smart about reducing his minutes, keeping him maybe around that 20, 25-minute range, not playing him back-to-back, then a lot of those things that people are worried about shouldn't be an issue and hopefully fit into what they're thinking about, which may be, a second unit role. If he starts playing those big minutes, then I do worry about his 38-year-old body starting to break down come April or May.
If he were, your friend or asking you for personal advice, the Warriors are going to play up-tempo more than he's played up-tempo. He's got 38-year-old body. He's got hamstrings that you referenced already that he's pulled probably multiple times. What could a guy like Paul do? Is it just lessen his body weight or stretching so that he actually could play the Warriors style and still not be susceptible to hamstring injuries?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is, obviously not playing through discomfort and soreness. I think flexibility is key. But I use LeBron as a prime example of someone who's able to pick and choose when they exert themselves. I mean, some players like Curry, because they're in great condition, are constantly going at 100 miles an hour all the time, constantly moving. And you see LeBron as the master of, I'm going to take this play off, or I'm not going to exert myself here until I really need to do so. So I think it's picking and choosing his spots and exerting himself and knowing that he has a certain number of steps or mileage that he can exert himself during the season and not to waste it needlessly running down the court in a fast break or, cutting extra hard off that screen. So I think if he's able to pick and choose his spots, maintain that flexibility, keep the weight down, that's going to improve his chances of staying healthy as the season goes on.
How much does the age of the big three, Steph, Clay, and Dre, assuming he does re-sign and come back, how much does that concern you going into another 82-game haul plus the postseason?
Yeah, I mean, definitely it's a point of concern. And I think that where I get concerned is that if a lot of your core, and Gary Payton II's over 30, you've got a lot of, players on that team that are old. In the regular season, where are these minutes going to come from? Because the way to kind of maintain the core is to play them less, not have them play back-to-backs, maintain their body for April, May, and June. But then where are those minutes going to get eaten up? Because once you start getting these players playing 30, 35 minutes a game, they've had so much longitudinal wear and tear. You worry about those things creeping up. And, we like to think that there weren't many health issues last year, but Steph missed a lot of the season. Obviously you see it wasn't overused stuff, but with the shoulder and the knee issue, Wiggins didn't play a lot of games. Draymond stayed healthy, but obviously had his back issues the season before. So you do worry about, especially with Clay, conditioning as well too, are they going to be able to play those minutes and where are those other minutes going to come from? And are they going to play a lot of minutes simply because they don't have the depth, which could come back to haunt them come May or June?
One quick one on Trace Jackson Davis. I mean, he's had a full career at Indiana. He did battle some back problems along the way. I mean, it seems like back problems and running up and down on NBA hardwood are not necessarily a great mix, but what would you say to a young player who's had back problems coming into the league? Are there things that a guy like TJD can do to try to prepare his back for the long haul? Because, I mean, to me, the big jump here, Doc, is that you're going from 35 games in college. They may go 120 in the NBA if you mix in preseason and postseason. That's almost triple the load. That's significant.
Oh, no, absolutely. And I think that's the biggest jump for college players is that it's not necessarily playing in game, but it's the fact that, there's not as much rest between games and they're constantly exerting their body and they don't have time to build it back up. So I think for a player, particularly with back issues, I think they've got a great example, even though Looney didn't particularly have back issues, but core issues, like working with someone like Kavan, who's had issues in terms of his core, knows how to strengthen it, and that's what's going to help his back. So I think really looking at these veteran players and being like, look, let's strengthen your core, learn how to take care of your body in these off days. How can you maintain strength even though the season's long? And how to talk with the staff, talk with Celebrini and say, hey, I'm feeling this. How can we work on making sure this doesn't crop up? Because these players want to play, so they're going to ignore some of the pains that they're having, which could come back to haunt them, especially as the season goes on. So I think looking at those veterans and ones who've had similar injuries and really taking those lessons from them.
Maybe we get TJD to do yoga with Moody and Looney.
Doc, be honest. Was your wife cursing at all when Dibs pulled you away from the family?
Yeah, when I said it was a sports-related text, she's like, put that away. Yeah, it's not part of our vacation. I said, oh, no, it's the hospital, not Dan.
My apologies to the missus, but I had never heard of a ruptured A4 pulley before, and I knew one man would have the answer.
Happy to help anytime, anywhere in the world, Dan.
Apparently. Doc, you're my guy. Thank you so much. Have a great afternoon.
You too. Take care, guys.
Dr. Nirav Pandya. The preceding was sponsored by UCSF Health.